The topic for this evening is, what is a fair society? And we might ask, what do we mean by a fair society? Is fairness about equality? And what do we mean by that? Equality of opportunity or equality of outcomes? Some people talk about something called meritocracy, where apparently we all have the equal chance for unequal rewards. The problem there is that wealthy people can then send their children to expensive schools and give them extra life chances. So it's not clear how unequal rewards result in equal opportunity. And from another political perspective, you have people who say, is it fair that the government taxes my hard-earned earnings and give it to all these layabouts who watch the television on benefits? So we have another idea of fairness there. One influential answer to this problem comes from John Rawls. Rawls was writing in the 1970s, and he wrote a book called A Theory of Justice. And his main argument is that justice is fairness. And I'll give you an idea as to what the main parts of his argument were. He has a thought experiment where he describes something called the veil of ignorance. What this means is that if we didn't know who we were, if we didn't know if we were men, women, blind, seeing, abled, disabled, what ethnicity we were, what colour our skin was, if we knew none of that, we would be basically ignorant of our own condition. So we don't know if we're rich or poor and so on. And he thinks if we have this thought experiment, we would ask these people what would make a fair society. They would come up with an answer that would be fair for everybody, because they wouldn't be thinking, oh, I'm sticking up for the proletariat or I'm sticking up for the capitalist. They'd be thinking, what will be good for everybody? So it forces impartiality. I'm not going to in great detail, but Rawls thinks that we would have equal basic rights and freedoms for everybody. And he has quite a sophisticated idea about inequality. And he says that the degree of inequality that society should be that benefits the worst off. So the key idea is that fairness does not equal strict equality, but inequality must be justified. As I said, written in the third quarter of the 20th century. So that in that context, he was writing in a post-war mixed economy where there was much stronger emphasis on government intervention and broader acceptance of redistribution. He assumes a relatively stable society and a shared political framework. Rawls is a political liberal concerned with rights, fairness, and justice. We're now in the second quarter of the 21st century, so what has happened in the 3 generations or something like that since Rawls was writing? Well, there has been a shift in political economy generally, a shift towards neoliberal economics, towards markets, competition and incentives, less emphasis on redistribution. So this is a little bit confusing here because we're using this term liberal in 2 slightly different ways. So one way to think about it is liberalism, say Rawls's liberalism, is about fairness and rights, whereas neoliberalism is about market-based economics. What has happened as the Western societies have moved towards neoliberalism, there's been increased inequality and diminished social mobility. And there's more to it than that. In the 1990s, there was a chap called Francis Fukuyama who wrote a book called The End of History. And at the end of the 90s, it was assumed that liberal democracy was the answer for the world. And there's no need to develop any new political systems. The Berlin Wall has fallen, the USSR has fallen to bits, and now we're all going to be liberal democracies. However, in the 21st century, we're not quite so sure, are we? We have the rise of populism, a less shared sense of political values. And so we have a disjunction between the real world political economy and the kind of the discussion around justice and political philosophy in the academy. Rawls is still very influential in philosophical thinking, but in general, the world outside of the academy looks very different. And this raises the question, are we still asking the same question about fairness? Rawls, for example, assumes that we're all rational, risk-averse individuals and have a shared view of what matters: freedom, opportunity, self-respect. However, this might already reflect a liberal way of thinking, and not everybody or all cultures may approach fairness in those terms. But a couple of broader questions. Is all political philosophy shaped by its time and culture? You heard me suggesting that Rawls was writing sort of in the period after the Second World War, where there was much more of an emphasis on redistribution. That's now changed. Are there even any universal principles of justice? And as I usually do in these talks, I'm going to reference my old friend Aristotle. Many political philosophers argue that for the true or the pure or the best political arrangements. Aristotle, however, is slightly different. And Aristotle suggests that there might be different forms of political structures suited to different societies. And I will leave my talk there. Thank you.